My name is Sam Dale. I work in the Farm Business Department for GSC Grays. We've got a fantastic showing of speakers tonight, so I'm not going to waste too much time here. Tonight's meeting is titled the Business Resilience Roadshow. And once again, the industry and the people that work in the industry have been asked to dig deep into that resilience that we've so often shown in the past. We're facing issues again, market volatility, weather volatility, politics, global issues, shortage of resources, whether that be labour or otherwise, and also cash flow pressures. So tonight, we're going to have a look into some of those issues with particular focus on the budget, but also look at some ways that we can build resilience within our business. So as I say, we've got a fantastic array of speakers tonight. We're going to start off hearing from David Hall, who's the Regional Director of the Northern Region of the NFU. We're then going to hear from Andrew Robinson, who's the Senior Agricultural Partner at Armstrong Watson. We'll then hear from James Bush of GSC Grays, and finish off by hearing from Helen Milburn and Ellie Honeyman from Jackson's Law. So without further ado, I'm going to pass on to David, who's going to kick us off.
Great to see so many people here. My name's David Hall. As we said, I'm Regional Director of the NFU for the North of England. Great to be working alongside Grace in running the events. My job tonight is to talk a little bit around the political scene and where we are in relation to policy that's really driving what people need to be able to do with looking into their businesses. I think one of the key things that will come out is that please don't make rush decisions or rash decisions on the back of the announcement that was made in the budget last week, which has had a real concern across a number of different things. I have some slides to run through. As I said, we will answer questions at the end. As I said, for me, the politics and the policy. So where we find ourselves now with a Labour government with a massive majority in where we are. If we look across the slide, you can see that the majority of the North of England now is Conservative. And areas, in effect, that would have been said of the story is, what's that, pin a blue rosette and a donkey and I'll get elected, put a blue rosette and a donkey and I'll get elected as Conservative. That's not the case. Some long-standing seats they've now changed. Some of that is down to boundary changes, where we've seen, but now significant change across the North in some real strong seats. And we see that as a real opportunity to engage with the new Labour MPs, young MPs that are coming in, new in seat, that are coming on a small majority, and really need the rural vote to continue with their seat. And in fact, they will be here for one term, and we see that as a positive to engage with them. There are across the country, there are 200 MPs that class themselves as having a mainly rural constituency, but there are 50 MPs that are primarily rural. And those are the MPs that actually come together as a grouping, they communicate with each other, and they're led, really represented by Joe Morris, who is the MP for Hexham. Again, we had Joe Morris out on farm last week, and also Dave Smith. So part of the team very much working with our local MPs on a regular basis in lobbying with them to raise the concerns and the issues, but really working with those 50 MPs across the country to try and influence them in their views. If we look at Labour's 5 missions of what they wanted to be able to achieve, very much around clean and green energy, and GB Energy being published and pushed the primary goal of what we're looking to achieve. Highest growth in the G7, but when we look at the budget and the forecasts, I think they talked about growth of only 1.7%. So the government is going to have to do some work to be able to achieve the goals and the targets they want to do in relation to growth and really drive the economy. And that's something that we feel that the farming community can help the government deliver. Funding for the NHS, that was the primary outcome really of the budget, and the massive increases in national insurance that will help to fund the NHS. Levelling up society and safer streets, key priorities are the things that the government is wanting to deliver. If they go forward to our department with DEFRA of Steve Reed, the Secretary of State for Agriculture, Food and Farming, priority there in relation to clean rivers, lakes and seas. And that's a key priority very much that's on his radar, is looking at the utilities companies. And a lot of press is put in relation to making sure that water is clean, a lot of campaigning in that area. We then create a roadmap to move to Britain to a zero waste economy. Boost food security. This is the area that Daniel Zeigner's job title changed to Minister for Food Security. And speaks to Tom Bradshaw. Tom speaks to Daniel, and he said it was a lot easier in opposition, wasn't it? And to a certain extent, he's now with a man with the weight of the world on his shoulders. And the challenge as well being that food security is a priority for government or for Daniel, but he's been given no money to be able to deliver it, because all the money that's been forward in the budget is really to deliver the environmental targets that we have, which will come up in a minute. Item 4 is to ensure nature recovery. We're told very much we have the most depleted nature in the world. And again, things that can be done to address that and the priority for government funding. And then to protect communities from flooding. Major issues that we've seen in relation to climate change and changing weather patterns, which is impacting on rural areas. If we then come to the budget itself, the positives, £60 million for farmer recovery through the flood recovery fund, and farmers should have received letters to say that money is coming. Huge frustration there because of the haves and have-nots, but in effect a real positive, and that's something that's been put for positive spin that government have put on the budget announcements. In relation to the budget for agriculture for the next 2 years that's been committed, government will talk about an overall budget of £5 billion. And that is actually of securing 200 million of the underspend from the previous governments. There was about 350 million pound underspend. 200 million of that has been rolled forward. So the government will say £5 billion to invest within agriculture, and that is 2.6 billion this year and 2.4 billion for the coming year. One of the things that we were pushing for and will continue to lobby for will be a multi-annual budget, because generally we had been, when we were under the Common Agricultural Policy, we were used to a 7-year budget and a time frame. The last government, they committed to the length of the Parliament, so the changes that we've seen in BPS reductions, etc., were only committed to the end of Parliament, but at the moment the commitment is only 2 years. So again, we will push on to make sure the budget is increased. One of the challenges in relation to payments, though, is the hastening of the reduction of D-link payments. So we now know that the next tranche of payments going forward, the maximum any farmer will receive will be £7,200. So any money over £30,000 is a 100% reduction, and after that it's a 72% reduction. So significant change, and government have said they need the money out of the D-link pot into the Elm pot to be able to fund the schemes that they want to be able to deliver. Hugely frustrating, and the view of us, myself and quite a few members, this will actually cause potentially shorter term challenge within businesses on cash flow in the autumn next year than the issues around APR will do. That's much longer term impact on businesses. We will use that for government now to make sure that the SFI and Elm schemes are fit for purpose. They've given themselves a huge challenge now to spend £2.6 billion next year. We need to make sure the SFI schemes are fit for purpose and get businesses money into your businesses. So again, we will use that back with government. In reality, they've given themselves a huge challenge by closing the door of D-link payments and putting it into the Elm pot. Challenge, but also opportunity. If we then look at the big issue that is definitely touched the nerve with farmers, and rightly so, is the issue around APR, the reduction or loss of APR and BPR, and the reintroduction of the £1 million limits, and the introduction of a 40% tax rate reduced by 50%. Other speakers will cover those issues later in much more detail, but something in effect that this will be covered by the finance bill that will actually become law next spring in April. So there is a period of time to actually try to influence this and make changes to the announcements, and that's very much what we're doing as NFU, to lobbying hard to get some change within this issue, because it's really touched the nerve, and that farmers are hugely concerned. There are other areas, I'll go ahead I think on my slide to be fair, there are other areas that are changes that are being made that aren't covered, which is the changes with twin cab pickups, the effect that those vehicles will be treated as cars. Also the carbon tax potentially on fertiliser, again something that needs to be looked at seriously, could have an impact or will have an impact on the price of fertiliser. Changes to the taxation of furnished holiday lets, and also significant change in relation to, as we said, on national insurance and also minimum wage. So this may not impact us directly as farmers. It does our horticultural producers, which are big employers, but it's impacting on a lot of our customers, the processors. In effect, they employ a lot of people. Where can they pass that cost on? In effect, retailers very reluctant to give more for products. So again, the horticultural sector particularly vulnerable to the increases in national insurance and also minimum wage that have not been able to pass those costs on. So quite a few things within the budget, but very much the APR story has grabbed the headlines. But there are other things that the NFU are really focusing on to try to be able to address. I'll keep going for that one. I've pretty much done that. Our days around and being labelled, you will see it being labelled as the family farm tax and looking to be able to try and address it. And we have got the mass lobby in London on Tuesday next week on the 19th, where we've 350 members going down from the north of England, 1,600 members together, all lobbying their MP on that day and the impact that hopefully that will have. And we know that this will be a long draw with government, but we will be persistent in what we're looking to do. So it won't be through lack of effort if we don't achieve a change. If we look forward then a little bit around policy, a policy horizon scanning of what we think is coming down the line and things that we're working on the NFU on your behalf. The political fallout will cover localism agenda, very much around devolved funding where we are here, water quality, land use framework, trade deals, and then finally, last slide in relation to climate resilience. As we said, the political fallout of the challenge with the Labour government are the three headline issues around around APR that we're pushing back on really hard. The D-link payments must be an opportunity to get SFI right and get money into your businesses, which is key. One of the changes that we are aware of this week is around the expression of interest stage on SFI has now been taken away. So if farmers are wanting to put an application in for the SFI to 2024, they can do that now without going through the expression of interest stage. So we're really keen, again, I keep saying it, get money out of the door and get money into your businesses. And then, as we said, looking at Elm rollout, so look at the development of the higher tier of the CS Plus when that comes forward, and also potentially through landscape recovery. We're also looking at the planning and infrastructure bill, and we have a team again looking at our boards are looking at these issues, but looking at opportunities and challenges, particularly around the changes to planning law. One of the issues that we do know is how long it takes planning permission to be achieved. And basically, this must be a much quicker process and a smoother process for farmers to be able to get planning permission. One of the challenges that's been put forward that we are pushing back on is in relation to compulsory purchase of land for infrastructure schemes or for housing. And the proposal at the moment is that land can be purchased at agricultural value with no hope value. That's not fair. So in effect, again, that needs to be pushed back on, and we're again working, we'll put our consultation response back and try to address that as much as we can. And then also looking at the Employment Rights Bill, a piece of legislation that's coming through that will give what is in effect is what day one rights for employees. But this is a significant challenge for a lot of different sectors, but back to a bigger employers, that employees will have rights from day one. And what will happen is that will tighten the labour market because people won't be prepared to take a risk on employing somebody. You employ somebody for 3 months, find out it doesn't work out. In fact, you can't just have that conversation before you know it, you're in tribunal for an unfair dismissal claim. That will tighten the market. People won't take the risk. So again, ourselves and other organisations will try to make this legislation a little bit more fit for purpose. And as you said, get rid of outlaw or 0 hours contracts. If we then look at the localism agenda, looking at more opportunities for funding to be devolved down to local areas and local authorities. Steve Reed spoke at our Fringe event in September in Liverpool last year when he was in opposition and said under the Labour government there will be more devolved funding. Now they're in power, we're seeing this coming through, more aerial areas being developed, more combined authorities, and in fact more devolved funds. We have a meeting with Andy Burnham on farm in Manchester next week, and again really trying to work with the mayors to understand what their priorities are and really ensure that they see the rural areas as important. Because what we're concerned about in some areas is that the money, as we said on the local investment plans, the money will go to the urban areas, not to rural. So again, it's an opportunity to make sure to fight for members to make sure that the rural areas are recognised and funded appropriately. We have examples of that within the Shared Prosperity Fund, the UK Rural England Prosperity Fund money, minimum amount 50% to economic investment, 50% for community. Some areas, local authorities want to put 100% forward for community projects. If farming representatives not at the tables, the rural community does miss out. We need to make sure it's level. Also looking at the skills agenda, again, to make sure it's positive. And then looking more locally in relation to nature, the team grown, we have met many meetings looking, every local authority has had to develop a local nature recovery strategy. So it's making sure that we have representatives there at the meetings to make sure we sit in meetings with people around the table, lots of people that would love to have ideas of what you need to do with your land. And our job is to make sure, in effect, that they are, they represent the opportunities for production agriculture. So targets for tree planting, nature recovery, and issues around planning, making sure that we're influencing. So this is all around a positive environment for farmers to be able to operate in. Water quality. We know that the farming rules for water is currently being reviewed, and again, making sure that it's positive for farmers. Once the government have finished tackling the utilities companies, which they will in time, people's water bills will go up, the utilities companies will invest, they will come for the farming community. So we need to ensure that we're making sure the farming rules for water are fair for what you do within your businesses. Opportunities around autumn spreading for manures would not have happened if we hadn't pushed back and lobbied hard on that. And making sure that the rules are appropriate for modern farming practices. But in effect, there is still work to do to make sure that farmers have nutrient management plans and we're managing usage properly. And in fact, that we can make sure that things are right. We have a public perception to make sure that the farmers are doing what needs to be done to make sure the waters are clean. As we said then, the industry action and things that we can do is looking forward to make sure that when government do start to look at, or the Environment Agency starts to look at the farmers, we are in a much better position to ensure that we are delivering. And also making sure that government do support some of the investment that's needed. If farmers need to invest on farming in relation to slurry storage, other things for that investment, again, that the environment and the funding is there to be able to help and support. Then looking at the land use framework that's coming down the line, again, very ambitious targets that government has in relation to delivering for nature. Ambition in relation to the area of trees that they would like to plant, ambition in relation to protecting 30% of the land. You would maybe hear 30 by 30. 30% of the land protected for an environment protected by 2030, and then also looking at increasing 70 areas protected for wildlife. So key targets that the money, the ELMS money, SFI money is there to be able to deliver the targets. So again, how can the farming community be able to deliver these? But very ambitious targets there down. Also, as we said then in relation to housing, looking across the north of England, target risen from just over 46,000 properties to over 77,000 properties. All these land to build on and areas to be able to grow. And there's concern then in relation to the impacts on flooding, more concrete, more tarmac, again, issues, and also maybe building in inappropriate areas. And areas that we're also looking at, which potentially could be market opportunities for farmers, is around biodiversity net gain and also nutrient neutrality, that the building industry have got to be able to address to make sure that things can be taken forward. And is this something that farmers can offer and generate income streams? And finally, the points in relation to nature recovery and green energy. This covers the point, as I mentioned, in relation to local nature recovery strategies and looking to identify where there are opportunities to increase nature value and where there's opportunities for commercial agriculture. And really, it should be a mosaic across the country. It's not just everything for nature. We need food as well as nature. And then, trade deals. Obviously, the changes in America now very much has put the potential for a trade deal back on the cards with America. To threat that Donald Trump will put 20% tariffs on all the imports will have significant impact for some of our sectors of supplying. We've just opened up the market for beef and lamb. Cheese exports to America, significant if they start to close things down. So are there opportunities? But across a number of different countries that we're currently looking at in relation to deals, but making sure we do not end out and find ourselves back in a position as we did with Australia and New Zealand, where in effect we just open the doors and say, come on down. We can't have that again. It must be level, making sure that products that are imported and brought in here are produced to the standards that we produce to, and that is so vital that we do that. And again, we have a team of people that are sat around the table working to be able to develop and ensure that the trade deals are fair in what we're doing. Government have invested heavily in ambassadors around the world now to develop the markets. And again, that is down to the lobbying work and the effort of the NFU to be able to secure those ambassadors. This is my final slide. Looking at climate resilience, we're in a position now so that we are in a way of changing weather patterns. We've seen this year of one of the things is that pretty much the drills have followed the combines because farmers in effect now cannot risk, so we'll leave it a little bit and we'll plant a little bit later, and we caught out last year because of the wet weather. So things changing, farming practices need to change to be able to adapt in relation to warmer, wetter winters. We were told about warmer, wetter winters and hotter, drier summers. I don't think that we're getting the hotter, drier summers, but we're definitely getting the warmer, wetter winters. And again, that is running through. So seasons are changing and be able to adapt. We're also seeing disease challenge. The cases that we've had in relation to blue tongue coming in from the continent and very much taking over the south and southeast, and how that's impacting on trade. In fact, farmers will be able to change their farming practices as a result of that. And sadly, last weekend we had our first case of AI again that's probably come across the country. Again, that's putting huge pressure on APHA from a point of view of actually supporting those initiatives. And then the final point is around food security and really ensuring that we are producing as much food as we can from the country on a viable basis, and in fact setting targets for the food that we do produce. Concern and really trying to get to the bottom of what's government's view as food security, and that is not having somewhere around the world that they can ensure that they can buy from. We should be maximising and making sure that things that we can produce in the UK, we are doing, and horticulture is a massive opportunity for growth. So quite a bit of a run through, probably gone over my time, and apologies for doing that. But yeah, some real work that's being done in relation to policy, but it sets the tone hopefully for the changing period that we're in, and why businesses must look at what they're doing for the business going forward and plan for the future. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. And I'd like to pass on to Andrew Robinson from Armstrong Watson.
I hate microphones. Good evening, everybody. I'm normally loud enough, I don't need a microphone, so we'll give it a go. I'm Andrew Robinson, Senior Agricultural Partner for Armstrong Watson, and I look after only farming and landed clients across the east of England from our Hexham and North Allerton offices. I was a farmer's son. I still have an active role in a 1,000-acre tenanted mixed farm in Tyne Valley. We buy our bulls off one of the audience, so I'm expecting good behaviour. So I have a foot in both camps and I understand it from all quarters. When I was invited to speak at these events, probably 2 months ago, and run through the budget headlines, I never dreamt would have so much to talk about or so drastic proposals. But we'll have a go. We'll have a go in 20 minutes. That's what I'm going to talk about. It's how to build resilience in your business from the accountants and the tax point of view, some tips and some of my pet hates or whatever you might call them, and then we'll get into what was in the budget. So budget headlines. We all know about, or all have heard about inheritance tax, and I'll come back to that. I do have some concerns, a bit like David, that the APR inheritance tax situation is masking some more immediate ones. Those being the massive increase if you are employing staff. The employer's national insurance has gone up by 2.2% on your wages you pay, and in the intensive sectors, the pig, poultry, dairy, that could be quite a chunk of money. And not only are they making you pay more, they have reduced the level of salary where you start paying it. So it was over 9,000, you now start paying it on anyone, pardon me, that's 5. So that's good. I think that's a major cost for some farm businesses as well as the supply chain. Capital gains tax has basically had a 4% increase. So if you sell land, going forward, you'll pay 24%. If you sell the whole or substantial part of your business, you get £1 million of it at business asset disposal relief rates. They used to be rather nice at 10%. Unfortunately, they're going to increase from 14% and then to 18%. So there's some nasty capital gains tax rises should you have assets to sell or you get compulsory purchased, etc. And then, of course, there's the double cab pickups, which I don't think was really aimed at farmers. It was aimed at the world that uses them, like Chelsea tractors, and weren't used. But essentially, any crew cab, double cab pickups bought on or after the 5th of April 25 will be classed as a car for income tax or corporation tax purposes. In essential, what that means is if you bought one today, you get 100% tax relief on it in the year of purchase, as long as you used it for business. Afterwards, you will get very restricted allowances because it's been treated as a car and they limit the allowances on a car. It's a timing difference. Over the life of the pickup, you will get as much tax relief, but you're just not going to get that big hit at the start. Where it is more of a problem is if you were supplying your staff a double cab pickup, which they are using to go home and everything. The benefit in kind that they will be taxed on has suddenly gone from being a van to a car based on its emissions and other things. So that one's the curve. Well, bizarrely, and I think probably the only positive thing to come out of the budget, in my opinion, is that you can still claim the VAT on your crew cab pickup. So you all need to rush out and buy your pickups before the 5th of April 25, but don't worry because you'll not get one, because anyone I've spoken to, there's none left to buy before then. So just before we get the budget, these are some recurring themes when I'm talking and recurring situations I see when sitting in front of farming clients. To build resilience in your business, you need to know where you're at now. And some of these may seem very glib, but they're going to become massively more important. Do you actually know who owns what in your business? Do you know, for tax purposes, who owns the land? Now, the land title might be registered in father's name or mum's name, but if it's in the partnership, there might be all four of you own it. Partnerships trump the title deeds and things. It's vital you know, especially with what the Chancellor has done. Do you understand your accounts? Do you have a partnership agreement? Does everyone have a will? I've asked that question and get no too many times. And our fellow speakers, I'm sure, will cover wills and partnership agreements more. But it's going to be even more important who proves what if we're all just going to get £1 million of cover on the assets. This might seem glib as well. Where are you going profit? If I had a quid for every time I'd been asked, well, you've said I've made 50 grand profit, but my overdraft's gone up, I probably could, definitely get a holiday out of it. But remember that cash flow is king. Understanding the relationship between your profit and the cash generated is the important bit, because things like depreciation and stock changes all affect that. And I'm sure James might cover more on budgets and things. And as I've just sort of said, you can't make your business resilient if you haven't planned for your cash flow, if you haven't done a budget. Don't just judge your business by what the overdraft level is, because there's a multitude of things. And know what your enterprise accounts are. And I make no apologies, because I do ask clients, how much are you making per acre of wheat, or what do you think your gross margins are? And they'll go, about. You can't manage your business on that. I am a farmer myself, so I feel quite comfortable saying such things. So we'll get into the meat of making your business resilient and the budget. So I've had to change this slide quite a lot since the budget. So do you farming, there has always been this debate, should I give the land away to the next generation or should I retain it? And it's changed a bit. So if you give assets away now, you're going to benefit, and you survive the 7 years, which we'll come on to, you're going to reduce your inheritance tax liability. You reduce your assets for care home fees, which can be quite penal if you still own a large asset or you own a large part of the partnership. But will you have enough income left to live on if you've given everything away? Just remember that point, will you have enough income? Because I'll come back to that when we're talking about inheritance tax. We're all wary of family disputes, family fallouts with younger generations, divorce and all that, that has to be, you are making yourself more liable to that if you give it away. Pardon me. There is a CGT disadvantage, capital gains. Obviously, if an asset passes through your estate, it suddenly is worth what it was worth on the date of death rather than what you bought it for. So capital gains. But I'm a firm believer that giving assets away now or sooner rather than later incentivises the next generation to get on and drive the business. You can, of course, choose to hold on to them. I think the big one at the top there is that's not very inheritance tax efficient if you hold on to more than £1 million of assets. You would be liable to pay your care fees, but you would have control over your income. It safeguards them from divorce or dispute, as long as the elder generation don't fall out. You get your CGT uplift. But I would ask the question for you all to think about why are we all so worried about getting a CGT uplift on your farm if you have no plans to ever sell it and you are planning to drop it a generation and to your grandkids after that to farm. Worry about capital gains tax if you're going to sell it. And I firmly believe when elderly parents at 70 odd still have the checkbook, you've missed giving the next generation a chance. So this is what we're all getting excited about, and it is drastic changes. If they go through, I think they will go through with the majority they've got. As I said, down in Harrogate, at the Northern Farming Conference, which I'm one of the organisers, I did have the chance after a couple of pints the night before to have a conversation with Daniel Zeigner about how drastic these were. It was as much use as talking to that table top. He was not for budging, they might say. So only the first £1 million of your land and business assets will now be 100% exempt from inheritance tax. Now, as a farmer, in the past, you have relied on agricultural property relief on the value of your land and property, so that land and buildings, and you've relied on business property relief on the value, and you probably didn't even know it, but you relied on business property relief for the value of the cattle, the sheep, the corn, the tractors, you name it, the combine and everything else. So now you get £1 million combined of them. Anything over the £1 million is going to be taxed at 50% discounted rate, 20%. So you can see it adds up pretty quickly. All the other inheritance tax reliefs for gifts and rates remain unchanged. I suppose another little positive is there was a one-liner from Rachel Reeves that said all land in environmental schemes does now qualify for agricultural property relief. There was some debate before the budget whether they would qualify if you weren't really doing any farming. So yeah, it's a little bonus or a little reassurance, but it still has to be covered by your £1 million. And then issues with farmhouses, non-agricultural value diversification still exists. So if just because you think you've got a farm, don't expect it to all get covered by agricultural property relief. What do I mean by that? If you're letting buildings for storage or other purposes, you have more than one farmhouse, or you think you have more than one farmhouse on the farm, you may have a property that's not covered by agricultural property relief. So just because you think you've got a farm doesn't necessarily mean you've got a farm for tax purposes. So what we all thinking we're going to have to do? Well, the first thing that isn't on this slide is both spouses at the very least, but as many partners in the business as you can are going to want to own £1 million. Because the £1 million is if one spouse doesn't use it, doesn't transfer to the surviving spouse. So you only get a £2 million lump of land or farm business covered if you own it £1 million each and you leave it to somebody else, the next generation on the first death. So don't automatically go think, oh, well, I'll leave it all to my surviving spouse and we'll get 2 million. You won't. So the first thing is everyone's going to have to give away £1 million on the first death. Wills will need changing, I'm sure that we spoke about. We're all gonna have to give away assets earlier. You're a brave person if you hold on to death. You need to get them given away when you've got 7 years to survive them, because they become a potentially exempt transfer and drop out your estate after 7 years. And if you can survive the gift, or you do survive the gift by 3 years, you start and get a discount on that. So there's going to be a lot. There's going to be a lot more trusts, because you can use them as and I'm sure the legals will speak more, but you can use them almost as another person, and they can have £1 million of assets, but don't rush into them lightly. And then I think we're all going to be taking out more life assurance. And I think that's particularly important on the younger generation. So if you, as a mum and dad, give the farm to your son or daughter, and we'll use an example of 35, there will need to be some life assurance taken out on their life, because if there's a tragedy and they die 2 or 3 years after you've gifted them the land, there's no planning can be done then. And one of the things I put to Mr. Zeichner was, I see this, and I've been quite spirited about this, I see this as a potential tax on tragedy. You do all the planning in the world and do your succession planning, use the 7-year rule as they're all spouting on about, and gift it down, then your son or daughter dies tragically. You're going to pay a fortune in inheritance tax on a tragedy. And I do not believe tax is supposed to be paid on assets and money at the very best, not tragedy. I told you to, just checking the time, told you to remember having control of your income. We're all going to have to dot the I's and cross the T's with the inheritance tax planning, and everything's going to have to work. So why do I say that? Well, HMRC wasn't really interested in your run-of-the-mill farmers, the farmer that died with a will with a boring, just run-of-the-mill farm, because there was no inheritance tax, whether it was worth 3 million or 100 million. If it was just a bog standard farm with no ancillary non-agricultural value, whether they argued it was worth more or less, there was no inheritance tax at risk. If you've got a £2 million farm you think you've got covered, and they can attack it and say, well, actually it's worth 2.5 million or 3 million, they're getting some tax this time. So we're going to have all the ducks in a row, and one of them is that if you give an asset away for inheritance tax, for it to be successful, you can't still benefit from it. So the classic example would be that you were a father or mother in a business, you give the land away to son or daughter, but then you still keep getting a large profit share out of the farm. You are still benefiting from that land, therefore you have got a gift with reservation of benefit, and it hasn't worked for inheritance tax. So we will be advising clients as they hand land over, there needs to be a demonstrable drop in income shown in the accounts the year after the land's given to prove that they're still not getting a profit share and a benefit from it. And I think everyone, because there was no inheritance tax on farms and businesses, we all were quite relaxed. We're all going to have to be on our mettle to keep up with it. This is just a quick example to demonstrate it. I don't know if you can all see it on the tellies and things, but we've got a widowed farmer who farms in partnership with his son. The farm's worth 3.5 million. The partnership capital, which is made up of the cows, the sheep, the tractor, or whatever it might be, is 500,000, and he's got 300,000 in his bank accounts or whatever, savings and other assets. So because the 3.5 million was covered by APR for the farm land, the 500,000 was covered by business property relief. That got rid of 4 million. He then had 300,000 left, which is covered by his nil rate band that we all still get. So effectively, there was no inheritance tax payable. Now that's even smaller, I appreciate it, but I'll give you the headlines. Under the new rules, if the widowed farmer and his son do nothing, he will pay £590,000 of inheritance tax. So we can see how drastic and draconian this is if nothing is done. And why is that? because he's only getting £1 million cover on the 4 million farm and tractors and beasts, and he's paying 20% on the rest effectively. So what do we need to do? Get it given away quickly. If he was to give it to his son now, he could, and survives 3 years, you can start to see the tax drop. If he survives 7 years, they've saved 590,000. But he will have to not take as much income from that farm business. Things to consider. So it's a horrendous tax. I could very easily get on a political high horse. This tax was this legislation was allegedly brought in to stop the billionaires and the Dysons of this world. If that's the example that's getting bandied around. Not entirely sure that's right on Dyson, but to stop them buying millions of pounds of farmland, owning it and farming it in inverted commas for 2 years and getting a 40% inheritance tax saving. It is, you may call it a loophole or you may call it good planning. Now, I argue that if you've got 20 odd million, 10 million sitting in the bank as Mr. Dyson, you can still go and buy 10 million pounds of farmland and still save 2 million of tax. Now, if somebody said to me, you can keep your 10 million in the bank or you can spend it on farmland and save 2 million, you would do it, wouldn't you? So the legislation doesn't work or doesn't set out what they do. It penalises all those family farms, but we'll have more of that in the questions, I'm sure. Capital gains tax, I've done that really. Don't assume you'll get the business asset disposal relief. It is quite, you have to be selling the whole or substantial part of a business. You can't, without a lot of planning, sell a field and expect to get it. And remember, if you sell a residential property, the tax is payable 60 days after. This will become more relevant. There's many forms of joint ventures out there, share farming, contract farming, and many other things. They are a very useful tool, but make sure they're right, and that the landowner is still taking risk and actively involved in the farming, and it looks like a farming business and not a disguised rent, because we've all seen contract farming agreements where it works out at, if you do the maths, it works out £90 an acre every year, and it's a disguised rent. The revenue will be looking at all these things to try and get more land out of agricultural property relief to win their tax. That's just a bit more, if anyone has any questions on them, that's it. And that's a quick run through with me, because I would rather you all ask questions. We're all going to be about the end. You can contact me that way. Or if you want to laugh, follow me on social media as a hashtag farming accountant, because I have to bite my tongue fairly regularly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That was brilliant. We'll keep moving, and I'll pass straight on to James Bush from GSC Grace.
Right then, the title for this series of events is about building farm resilience. So what I'm going to do is talk to you about building farm resilience. Where are we going to start? Well, let's have a look at the definition of resilience. What is it? First slide. This is the dictionary definition of resilience. It's the capacity to withstand or recover quickly from difficulties, toughness. I think as a farming community, we can all relate to the last piece, toughness, absolutely. But I think we'd also agree that farms are at different levels in terms of being able to withstand or recover quickly. When we talk about building farm resilience, how do we go about doing it? Well, the first thing is looking at things that we can affect, something that's going to actually make a difference. There's no point in worrying about the things that we can't control, and actually our focus is far better made if we're actually looking at things that we can control. On this slide, I've got a handy little list on the left-hand side here. This is a very short list and by no means exhaustive, but this is some of the things that we can't control, but all have a bearing on our businesses. So weather and disease pressures, David's already alluded to it in his presentation, but weather and disease is something that we have no control over. We do have an ability to mitigate, but we certainly can't control it. Legislation, in brackets the government, 2 weeks ago, hammer blow, and we weren't expecting a lot of the stuff that came out of the budget. Again, it's nothing that we can directly affect as individuals. The NFU are working hard to try and get some sort of take back on that in the next few weeks. But in reality, we've been dealt a hand and we've got to deal with that as it's come. Market prices. And I put global markets because in reality, market prices are not something that we can do a lot about. As an industry, we are very much price takers rather than price makers. We've had a bit of harvest this year where yields have been down, and in a normal year, you'd expect that the prices might reflect that and be that little bit higher. We haven't seen that to any great degree. And that's as a result of the global market being flooded from other parts of the globe. The last point on there is the changing support. And arguably that one should be in with the legislation. But given the fact that we've got such a significant reduction in BPS next year, which has just been announced, I felt that it deserved its own line at the end of this list. So what can we control? Quite conveniently, there's more points on this side of the slide. We can affect more of it. I don't know whether you can see, but it is actually a font size bigger, and that was intentional. I'm going to run through this list very quickly because the following slides I'm going to cover each of these points in turn. So controlling costs of production, enterprise mix and systems, engagement with environmental stewardship, future structures of the business. That's an important one because it's not just about the tax planning, but it's also about the practicalities of running the business. Mindset. That's also a very interesting point. We'll pick up on that in a few minutes. And then finally, budgets and forecasts. So we take each of these in turn. Controlling costs of production. It sounds very easy and very simple, but the first part that you have to do to control costs of production is actually understand what the costs of production are in the first place. How many people in this room regularly do gross margins for the enterprises on the farm? Wow. Resounding 2 hands. Controlling the costs of production is our easiest way of affecting the bottom line. As I said, we're price takers, not price makers. So understanding what goes into each enterprise is key. As a farming business, you'll undoubtedly have assets that are spread across all of the enterprises on the farm. So the cost of production doesn't just fall against the variable costs, things that are directly affected by the outputs, but also the fixed assets, the overheads that have labour, machinery, and the finance costs as well. So understanding that in detail gives you an opportunity to then look at how the enterprises interact with each other. That then comes, actually, a couple of quotes here, missed this one. These are quite interesting. This first one's from Graham Redman, who is from the Anderson Centre. Higher outputs account for just 10 to 30% of higher profits in the top quartile of farm businesses, but lower costs contribute to 65 to 90%. That quote alone tells me that the focus should be on what we're putting into our enterprises rather than worrying about what's coming out of the other end. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying ignore that bit, but this is where we can actually have the biggest effect. I've also got a quote on here, which you wouldn't normally see on a set of farming slides, and this is from David Brailsford, who was the manager of the GB cycling team in 2012. If everything could be managed, improved by a marginal 1%, then the overall impact would be noticeable. The interesting thing with David Brailsford, and we know how successful they were, 2012 was a very successful year, and actually subsequent Olympics were also very successful. Not only did he look at the wheel size and the bike weight and the training schedules of the athletes, which we would all naturally go to as things that we would be looking at, he also looked at hand cleanliness because he was worried about the drag that they might be getting going around the velodrome from dirty hands. Enterprise mix. Once we understand the costs of production for each of our enterprises, we can also then look at how the business is made up and how each enterprise contributes to the bottom line. Invariably, what we can find is that actually one enterprise might be propping another up, or it might be that the majority of the fixed costs or overhead are actually focused on one enterprise, and it might not be contributing as much as you actually think. So enterprise mix is key. It also builds resilience in as much as it means that you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. I know some businesses haven't got that opportunity. They tend to be more focused and specialised in certain sectors, but generally, most farming businesses will have 1 or 2 enterprises as a minimum. Engagement with environmental stewardship. This is quite a key one, and it fits quite nicely with the enterprise mix. Environmental stewardship should be taken as an enterprise in its own right. When you enter these schemes, don't be looking at it as a way just to replace the BPS. Most people have looked at it, so my BPS has gone down by this amount, I need to look at Elms, I need to look at getting that payment back and how am I going to do it. That's quite right. I'm not blaming you for wanting to go and sign up to these schemes, but treat them as an enterprise in their own right. Most of the actions or the options that are available through Elms have costs associated with them as well. And the impact that some of those actions can have can be negative on some of the enterprises that you might have on the farm. So you need to understand that the effect that they're going to have on those, as well as what they're going to bring in terms of financial returns. I will come on to herbal layers in a minute because it's an example that I have here, but there are certain actions in there. If you employ them in the right way, they are going to help the bottom line. I use these as a catalyst for change. What I mean by that is enter these actions with the objective of getting to a point where the business is sustainable in its own right. If in 3 years' time when this scheme ends and there's nothing to replace it, make sure the business is in a position that it can actually carry on without it. So we're not just replacing the BPS and not just being wholly reliant on the support payment. The one thing that is guaranteed is we're only guaranteed of these schemes being as long as the scheme we've entered at the day where we sign on the dotted line. Now, arguably, I wouldn't think they'll be taking any funding away from environmental benefits going forward because that won't fit with the government's plans to hit the 2030 targets and the other things that David spoke about earlier. But we don't know what form that's going to take and how intrusive that might be. So whatever you can do with these particular actions now, use them in a way that they were designed to be used, which is to help you transition to a more sustainable business model. And when I say sustainable, I'm not just talking environmental, I'm talking financially sustainable, which is where I think this fits far better than just the environment. So here's a worked example, and I appreciate we'll have arable farmers in the room, but I'm more comfortable with grassland, sheep and cows, because that tends to be what I do a lot more of. This is a worked example of a farm that the business has been involved with further north with one of our directors. Not through SFI, this was back when it was a mid-tier agreement, GS4 herbal layers. They didn't go into the mid-tier purely to generate the payment. They went into it to try and make this enterprise, the cattle suckler cow herd, more profitable. So when this started, when the process started, there was 120 cows that were selling 80 calves a year, and the average price was £753 per head. At that time, feed costs were £71 per head and the cost of fertiliser was £60 per hectare. Using a combination of the stewardship scheme to introduce the herbal layers, changing to a rotational grazing pattern, tightening the calving pattern up as well, and also looking at the overheads that were employed in this business in terms of the machinery and labour, we went to a position where it was 117 calves sold annually at an average price of £963 per head, no nitrogen fertiliser, no hard feeds, and the cattle gross margin jumped from £107,000 to £107,000 from £39,000, which it was where we started. The benefits of the herbal lay in this system is not just the fact that we got the payment. In fact, that payment's not even in those numbers. This is the enterprise in its own right. The herbal lays managed to extend the grazing by a significant amount, several months in the year, improving soil structure, improving drainage, drought-resistant crops because of the deeper rooting. All of that together meant that the wintering period was much less, so the costs associated with keeping them were much less. So it's an overview. It gives you an example of how this can be used in the right way. So we know if this payment actually gets removed, that business is far more sustainable than it was 3 years ago when we started looking at it. Future structures of the business. So again, we've already heard from the accounts from Andrew in terms of structures, and it's something that again we'll probably hear about from the solicitor side of things. Structures are important. Obviously, they're going to have an important part to play in any tax planning going forward. But moreover, that there is important in terms of the functionality of the business and actually making sure that you get the next generation, if they're involved with the business, involved with the partnership at an early stage. We've got succession on there. That's not just about family-owned farms that are handing down to the next generation. That's also talking about tenanted farms as well, making sure that you've had the prerequisite amount of time involved with the business, making decisions to make sure that if you have got like an AHA tenancy, you have that ability to then go on and succeed if there's a generation left. We all run farming businesses. But I would argue that we're in the business of farming, and we need to have that mindset. We need to work towards treating it as a business. It's very easy for me to say that, and I know people will say it's a way of life. Absolutely, it's a way of life. Understand that, but it can only be a way of life as long as it exists. So we have to concentrate now on what we can do to make it resilient going forward. Mindset. For me, this is a big one. We can go through all the processes that we've gone through on the previous slides. You can be up for it from the beginning. But unless you've got the mindset that means that you're going to go through with it and push on, make it work for you and embrace change, it's not going to work. So mindset's a key thing. And I wouldn't say it's a generational thing necessarily, because in the area that I cover, which tends to be the Northwest, all ages, we have older generations telling the younger ones that they need to pick the heels up and crack on, and vice versa. So it's not a generational thing, but it's very much mindset change is key to building resilience. And then lastly, we've got budgets and forecasting and cash flows. How many in the room produce a budget for the farm every year? So we've got a few hands there. Have you guys, who reviews it on a regular basis? So when I say regular, quarterly, half yearly. And how many of you do it monthly? So we've got a couple. The purpose of a budget and a forecast is not to put numbers together at the beginning of the year, get the document, slap it in the drawer till 11 and a half months later, and then worry about what you're doing next year. It's a working document, it's organic, it's working all the way through the year. Use it as a means to be able to set targets and monitor your performance against it. Correct use of budgets and forecasts help when you're looking to finance, whether it's overdraft facilities or looking for other permanent lending. The banks will use this as a way to actually assess whether you understand your business. This builds a lot more confidence. Admittedly, peaks and troughs, we don't know exactly what things are going to make, but we can look at the cash profile throughout the year. So then, as I say, it puts more confidence in the lenders to actually help you and finance you through it. Monitoring performance is not just about monitoring performance in the year. It's also looking at what performance was the previous year and seeing whether there's trends. And if there's not trends, why? There's something going on, because it should follow a pattern, hopefully. Benchmarking is another key thing. And that's not just benchmarking against yourself in previous years, it's also benchmarking against other businesses. Not because any two businesses are the same, but it's nice to know whether you're in the right ballpark. I've got a couple of slides here on the characteristics, there we go, of top performing businesses. And conveniently, most of these points on here actually tie in with the slides that we've had previously. The one that stands out there, though, is understanding the market, and I haven't mentioned that. Understand the market that you're selling into. Make sure you're producing something that somebody wants to buy, and you're producing it to the specification. It's wasted effort if you're putting more into it than it needs. I use lambs as an example. If you've got a lamb that's fat as butter and then put it in and it's going to be trimmed out because it's not going to hit the spec, you're going to be penalised for it. So know who you're selling stuff to. All the other points on there, I think we've already gone through. This slide here is just an indication. This is to show the difference between income levels of the bottom performers in each of these industries versus the top, and it's the mean of those numbers. So although the numbers down the middle could be quite different to what you would expect, there are extremes at either end. Interestingly, in beef and sheep, the top performers are doing about 4 times more than the bottom performers. Cereals and oil seeds, not quite as much as that, but you're still talking nearly 3 times, 2.5 anyway. And then dairy farms, nearly 4 times more. And the difference is there's those people that are using the methods of controlling the costs of production and actually going through the process of monitoring the business on a regular basis. And that is the common theme with all of the farms that are assessed in this particular study. After all that, I'm just going to move on to Future Farm Resilience Fund. And I would try and say it's not a sales pitch, it is in a way, not just for me though. So our business, our Future Farm Resilience Fund, Farm Business Advice Service, this is a fund that was put together by DEFRA, I think it was 2.5 years ago now. That fund was designed to help farms transition through the reducing BPS payments and to the point where we're losing in 2027. And the purpose of it is to make sure that we're on sure footing when whatever comes. Our particular scheme allows us to come on farm for a couple of hours. We can allocate half a day's time to it to actually come out, understand what the business is, look at what the objectives of the business are. You might not have any objectives, so the purpose of the meeting is for us to sit down and say, well, actually, these are your objectives. This is what you should be looking at. We produce a report on the back of that, and depending on what comes out of it, we can then go on to provide another 2.5 days of time to come and help deliver those objectives. This screen here shows some of the things that we've done in terms of the follow-up work. The bigger and bolder the writing, those are the things that we're doing more of. So budgets and cash flows right up there, Elm schemes, countryside stewardship, succession planning. It just so happens we're getting a few more of those. Carbon auditing. Any of you guys that have already got assurance schemes where you're having to look at carbon auditing, or whether you may be having to do nutrient management plans and such like, there is funding here for us to be able to come and assess the situation for you and actually produce a carbon audit if that's what you need. In terms of the wider Future Farm Resilience Fund, I would add there are 17 businesses in England that are delivering this. There's 84,000 registered SBI numbers in the country. DEFRA provided for 32,000 to have this help. As we stand today, and Guy will correct me, but I think there's only about 16,000 that have actually taken the opportunity to use this fund. So whether you sign up with us, which is ideally what I'd like you to do, but if you don't, get out there and find one of the other 16 advisors that has that fund available to them and use it. Same with any other fund that DEFRA administers. If we don't use the pot, it'll be taken back and it won't be redistributed. So make sure you use it, make use of it. I think that's all I've got to say. Am I somewhere near on time, Sam? That'll do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James. I'd now like to welcome Helen Milburn and Ellie Honeyman from Jackson's Law to provide our final presentation of the night.
Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Ellie. I'm an associate solicitor at Jackson's Law Firm. I'm in the litigation team, although we do have a wider agricultural team that I'm also part of, so we'll generally be the point of contact for any agricultural clients. It's going to be a relatively whistle-stop tour of partnership agreements, as Helen and I are both speaking tonight. Key message, though, is planning, making sure that you've got everything that you need in your business and it looks the way that you want it to look. So the first question I would be asking, get the slides right. There we go. The first question I will be asking when taking on a new agricultural client is how that business is held. And Andrew touched on this slightly earlier. I'm going to change the order around a little bit, simply because of the recent changes that have happened. So limited companies, I think they're going to be more prevalent given the recent changes, particularly in an agricultural setting. They've got separate legal personality. So in the eyes of the law, they're essentially treated as a completely different person. The limited company will own its own assets and it will also own its own debts. What that essentially means is that the business owners have very limited liability in the sense of limited company. LLPs are a little bit of a hybrid between limited companies and a traditional partnership, insofar as they are relatively flexible, but there's that limited liability there for the business owners. And then finally, partnerships, which is going to be more of the focus of our talk this evening, is generally the more commonplace way of farming, really. Again, I think that's likely to shift slightly in terms of balance. No separate legal personality, and what that means is essentially the partnership will act via its partners. That means that every partner, jointly with their other partners and themselves alone, will be personally liable for everything that the partnership is also liable for. As you can appreciate, that is, I suppose, a bit of a risk for each of the partners, and it needs to be kept in mind that any deficit between the debts of the partnership and the partnership assets can be sought from each individual partner. So the importance really is making sure to safeguard the assets of the business as much as possible and the assets of each individual partner. A partnership, whether or not you're intending to run as a partnership, you will do, providing that you satisfy that particular criteria. 2 or more people carrying on business together with a view to profit, which is generally most businesses with more than one person involved, and that will arise automatically. Now, where there is no partnership agreement in place, the Partnership Act of 1890 will automatically apply. Now, it's dated back to 1890, so it is old, and it's old-fashioned, basically, in how it then implies rules upon each partnership business. So, a bit of it again, we'll stop tour in terms of what the Partnership Act will imply into each business. They're all partnership at wills, and that means that each partner, if they were so minded to, could serve notice to dissolve the partnership altogether. And that can be quite a drastic move, and I'll discuss a little bit more about dissolution in a moment. A partnership will be automatically dissolved on death or bankruptcy. Again, importance on succession planning, which Helen will speak about in a moment. There is no power of expulsion. So if there was some wrongdoing on the part of a partner, you can't just sack them in the same way that you would be able to through employment scenarios. Again, the only get out there is to dissolve completely. Equal profit shares, that will be something that's implied upon the partnership business. That can become a problem if responsibilities among the partners differ in some ways, which can often be the case. And ordinary matters can be decided by majority decision, unless there is a more drastic change in terms of the partnership business. Again, that can become more of a problem if we've got a situation where 2 partners will generally run the business, but a whole horde of other family members that may be involved. So should any of those things happen, and we're looking at dissolution, as I say, that can be quite a drastic issue, particularly if there's some animosity there with one of the partners. Essentially, each partner is entitled to force the sale of the partnership assets, and the proceeds would be applied in the order that we've set out on the slide there. So debts and liabilities would be paid first. You'd go then down to current accounts, capital accounts, and then everything else split equally among the partners. I just wanted to add on to the end of the slide and the presentation this evening, some sort of common misconceptions and issues that we see as litigators in our Jackson litigation team. And again, Andrew touched on this slightly earlier. Ownership of land is a big one, and it's something that we see quite often in terms of disputes between parties, whether it be a family fallout or something like that, where all of the partnership assets are being assessed. There is no statutory fallback provision in the Partnership Act as to who owns what. So essentially, the entire estate could be up for grabs in terms of litigation, and there is case law as to the partners would own it individually, the partnership would own it as a whole. It's not certain. So it's incredibly important to make sure that you've got a partnership agreement setting out the rules that you want to apply to your business. So it may be that there are parents with the legal title of land in their own names, on the assumption that would remain in their own names. That's not necessarily going to be the case. So your partnership agreement should be setting out who owns what. Likewise, expulsion. We've seen this in scenarios where spouses have been added as partners of the partnership and then there's been a subsequent divorce. There is no get-out clause if you haven't got a partnership agreement in place to deal with that. That particular spouse would be a partner of the partnership regardless. And finally, with profit shares and entitlement, quite often where siblings have perhaps inherited a farm and there would be in mind one particular partner that would run the affairs of the business. Now, without a partnership agreement, the profit share would be equal, regardless of how involved each partner is. So it's setting out in writing those rules that you want to apply so that you haven't got an act from 1890 dictating those for you. It's planning, making sure that the business looks the way that you want it to look. Talking about planning, I'll pass over to Helen, who will be speaking more a little bit about succession planning and wills. So I'll pass you on to her. Thank you very much.
Right, so Good evening, everybody. I'm following on from Ellie, who was talking about the partnerships company side of things, and I'm going to be talking through tonight about wills and lasting powers of attorney. Of course, extremely conscious of the recent outcomes of the budget, so whilst I'm going through, I'm going to be giving my comments and views on that. So a little bit about myself. My name is Helen Milburn. I'm a solicitor at Jackson's. I'm partner and head of our private client team. I deal with wills, trusts, estate planning, LPAs and estate administration. A little bit about me personally. I'm not from a farming background myself, but I grew up in a small village where my dad and his brother were in partnership in the family business, which they inherited from their dad and his dad and his dad and his dad. So I know a little bit personally about the complexities of family businesses, the dynamics and the difficulties there may be. So I'm going to be talking to you about wills and LPAs and future-proofing, why you should put them in place. So in terms of wills, why should you make one? Well, it's really twofold: to ensure that whoever you want to inherit your assets and your farming business does, and really to try and do that in a tax efficient way. So the landscape has probably changed quite drastically in the last week or so when we're talking about wills, and whether we may well sort of, as been said, looking at more lifetime planning measures, whether that's going to be more popular, making gifts, lifetime trust, but ultimately with a will, we're all going to go at some point, and there's going to be something in your estate that needs to be dealt with. And that needs to go who you want it to do tax efficiently, even if the situation may be not quite as good as it is at the minute. And in terms of what puts us off, obviously making a will, succession planning, time and expense is an obvious one, but I often think it's difficult conversations. It's hard to have those discussions with family, to talk about when you're not there, but it's really important to have those. And I know a lot of you will be having kind of difficult conversations already post budget. And I think another reason that I see quite a lot when people come to see me is in relation to choices in terms of beneficiaries, what you're going to do. Sometimes there's a stagnation because there isn't any clear choice about what you want to do with your business. Sometimes there are too many choices, maybe family members who want to be involved, those who aren't, and you're trying to balance out those interests the best you can. Sometimes, because you can't make a decision, what can be a sensible thing to do is to consider trusts within your will, and I'm going to come and talk about the benefit of those in a moment. So what can you achieve by making a will? Obviously, your wishes regarding who inherits, but these are a real opportunity to maximise inheritance tax reliefs. Obviously, as we've been discussing earlier, the landscape may look quite different. But what's going to be more important than ever is to make sure everything is in order to get the reliefs that are available. Certainly in relation to wills, what we've been talking about is this £1 million cap that is not transferable between spouses in some ways that the other reliefs are. So when you're making a will now more than ever, we're going to be thinking, how can you make sure you bank that relief on your death so you get it? So a carefully and detailed, accurately structured will is going to be more important than ever. And what are the first steps when it comes to the will making process? Well, it's really to think about things and take time. As we were saying before, who owns what? You might look at me and think, Helen, that's a ridiculous question. We know who owns what, but we see we don't. Things get caught up over the years. Things are recorded on unregistered title, piles of documents, and people aren't clear who owns what. And also, particularly with partnerships, it's really important to know what assets are in the partnership. And I think, as we were saying earlier, that's going to be more important than ever, because at the moment, it's pretty much APR, BPR, if everything's set up right, you're going to get it. HMRC might not look too closely, but we think that they are going to be taking a really close view on that in terms of what's in the partnership, what isn't, because sometimes, especially for BPR, it can be better to have things in that partnership. and also what we were saying about the long and short term plans. Could get into a situation where it might be beneficial to be making lifetime gifts. And if you are in the elderly generation, are you comfortable with doing that? Are you comfortable with taking a step back earlier, or are you planning to, die with your boots on? It's going to make a difference. And also, sort of, we were saying earlier about the partnerships and reducing income when things are moved over. So it's going to be a lot to think about. And this is hugely important as well in terms of business structure and how that impacts on your will. You have to know what structure you're operating in, and you have to have all the right documents. I think one really key thing to talk about tonight is that once your assets are in a partnership or sharing a company, they lose their own individual identity. So I will have people come to sit to me and say, I want to leave this property to my son. I want to leave these 3 specific fields to my daughter. Yeah, we can write that for you in a will, but the bottom line is you may not own them. You may own, that may be held in a partnership. So your will would have to make a gift of your share rather than these individual assets. You can see that, little things like that, things can go drastically wrong. And similarly, it's important that the documents actually reflect the true ownership position, because those kind of documents can conflict with your will. Say, for example, with partnerships, that would override the terms of your will. So I can think of an example, say, for example, husband and wife and son are in partnership together. They make wills, and the partnership deed says, partnership's 3 equal parties. If any of the parties die, then split between the surviving parties. That's what the partnership says. Husband and wife perhaps don't realise this. They make a will and they say, well, actually in our wills we want everything in our share in the partnership to go to our son. But because the partnership says it's split 3 ways, that overrides the terms of your will. So you could have very unintended consequences. So it's important to have the right documents and know what's in your documents. So in terms of structuring wills, we're talking about people can leave things outright, or you can leave them in trust to people. I feel that trusts are probably going to become more prevalent because what they're allowing is flexibility. So when I'm talking about a trust, I'm saying that within your will, you're giving assets for your farming business into a pot, and you're having people who could potentially benefit from that, but no one specific. And what that does is that allows flexibility for the future. You're writing your will now, hopefully it won't come into effect for many years in the future. So you're basically planning ahead. And it also allows for changing in legislation. Obviously, we've got the current inheritance tax rules now. They're changing. They may change again in future, and it just allows to keep up with that, so that when you've gone, your executors, your trustees can make a decision about what's best. This could be really crucial. Things like banking this £1 million relief, making an assessment along with your accountants whether perhaps assets go to spouse, the spousal exemption, or whether you take the hit on paying, passing it to perhaps the next generation and getting APR and BPR. It just means there's so much more flexibility for decisions to be made. And I think this really is going to be the way forward for will planning. If you don't make a will, the intestacy rules kick in. You don't want that to happen. These are definitely not your friends. So for a standard example, husband and wife with kids, if husband dies, the law says the first 322,000, very random figure, goes to wife. The rest of the estate is split 50-50 between spouse and kids. So you can imagine from those figures, a division of your business isn't going to neatly fall into that, and it can also cause chaos for your APR and BPR relief under the intestacy rules. So we want to avoid that. And obviously, you want the people you want to do things. Simple as that. So that's my quick run through wills. I just want to talk very, very quickly, because how many minutes have I got left? Couple, right? Don't want to be left further for the food. So what is a lasting power of attorney? So this is something very different. So we're moving away from wills. So it's basically a legal document that you put in place to cover the possibility of you losing mental capacity in the future. Now that could be through something sudden like an accident or a long-term illness, for example, dementia. Without one of these in place, as you will appreciate, there is so much red tape in the world now, there is nobody able to make decisions on your behalf. So imagine that you've lost capacity, you're running a business, you've got your personal finances, not your spouse, not your kids, not anybody can make those decisions for you. It's going to cause chaos, particularly in relation to a business. You can put an LPA in place to stop that happening. And it's very much like an insurance policy. It's just for peace of mind. If you don't have one, then your only option is to apply to the Court of Protection for someone to make those decisions for you. You will know whenever I say the word court that you're thinking that is expensive, costly and very time consuming. It is. Takes over a year, costs a lot of money. And basically it's putting strain on your family that could be avoided. So definitely good idea to put in place LPAs. So I've just had really quite a quick run through everything there. So please feel free to come and ask me any questions. Obviously, what questions at the end, or I'm always happy to speak to people and answer any questions. And here's just a few key takeaways from my run through today. Thank you.
As promised, we are going to have some questions. Is it just down there? If there are any questions.
Sorry to be the first. Thank you very much. It's been great. First question, the general one. Do the panel think the price of land is going to go up, or is it actually going to go down? Now there's a penalty attached to it. That's my first question. Second question is, what does tenants in common mean? Because does that mean you can double your million if you're tenants in common? Thank you.
I'll have a go at the land value one. And James can have a go after us. I don't think it'll have much impact on land at all, really, because there's still a 20% discount for people with money in the bank that want to save inheritance tax and buying land. And remember that an awful lot of the land that has been sold recently isn't just bought by farmers, it's bought by all sorts of people to get biodiversity, net gain, nutrient neutrality, carbon storage, environmental schemes. So my view is there might be a short-term hiatus in any land getting sold until we all understand the rules. But I would guess it'll probably still, I don't think it'll go up a lot, but I don't think it'll go down a lot, which might be a good thing if we've all got debt secured on it.
I haven't really got much to add to that, Andrew, but what I would say is I don't think it is going to be affected too greatly. Ultimately, farms that are looking to invest will still be buying land, and arguably if you're borrowing money against it to do it, then obviously that comes out of the value before it's taken into account for APR, BPR. So no, I don't think there's going to be a significant effect straight away, but I might be corrected. I've got to be careful to say because our MD's sitting in here as well. So.
Yeah, so owning land or property as tenants in common with somebody else basically means you have a divisible share of that property. Is that my thing? Oh. So in principle, it wouldn't necessarily make too much of a difference, but because if you own things in like a partnership, then it's not in your own individual ownership. But owning tenants in common potentially between spouses where you own assets in your own name, that might be something that's important going forward, because what we've been discussing is that it's going to be important for each person, I guess, to make sure they have their own £1 million because this cap's non-transferable. So equalising assets between spouses, yes, tenants in common might be important going forward. So it's important to review your land ownership.
Thank you. The comment was made earlier that partnership names trump names on land registration documents. And then there was comments made about partnerships and assets are being left in wills and effectively were being split between partners. does that mean that if, for instance, a husband and wife own their farm and they bring a son into partnership, does that mean he effectively gains 1/3 of the value of the farm on being made a partner?
I'm sure you'll have a go at this one as well. If you haven't got a good, strong partnership agreement that says who owns what and what proportion of the assets, you will fall back on the 1890 Partnership Act and say you own them jointly thirds each. So it's that's what I would say. And
Yes, absolutely. So just to recap, the position isn't clear, being honest, and there's litigation and case law both ways. So the best way to be able to control it is to write it down in a specific partnership agreement, who owns what, and in what shares. If you don't, it's not certain, and that's the reality of it, unfortunately.
So if the two parents, this is working now, if the two parents are happy for 1/3 of the value to go to the son effectively, is this a way of shedding 1/3 of the value of the farm before death without capital gains tax implications?
That is something that you could structure in a partnership agreement, but I'd probably pass over to one of my fellow speakers to talk about the tax.
thank you. You would be able to do it free of capital gains tax because you'd be able to, as long as they were all qualifying business assets, you can apply for, you can go for holdover relief, which allows them to move around connected parties free of capital gains tax. But you would still need to survive the 7 years for it to fall out of your estate because it becomes a potentially exempt transfer. So you would need to survive 7 years from the gift for it to fall completely out of your inheritance tax estate.
So both the parents would have to survive 7 years. If one of them deceased quickly, the situation therefore would be very complex.
Yes, but not insurmountable. But yeah, it's every gift is going to have to be given at 7 years before it falls out your estate, whether it's a partnership, whether it's a block of land, whether it's, you know, sheds, land. You will have to survive 7 years to get them out of your estate.
Yeah, so I apologise for going on a bit long. So therefore, if a son has been brought into the business, he gains 1/3 of the business effectively, 1/3 of the value of the business by being made a partner, and then say one of the other partners dies, he will get a capital gains tax bill on that debt.
No, you won't get a capital gains tax because capital gains is life. It would be, I think you're referring to an inheritance tax liability potentially. And then I think we go down to, if the person hasn't survived 7 years, it will fall back into the estate that gave it. Then is it more than or less than, is the third more or less than $1 million? If it's covered by $1 million, probably won't have any tax. So there's a lot of things in play there. But yes, your principle's right. But if you gifted something and you don't, the give or doesn't survive 7 years, there's inheritance tax to consider, but not capital gains tax.
Thanks, Andrew. So, a partnership is a gift. Is that what you're saying? Or you have said?
No, if you have three, in the example we're looking at, if you have 3 partners in the business, and let's go very simple. The partnership's worth 600 grand, and each partner has 200 grand. Well, I'm picking easy numbers, and mum or dad decides to give 150 grand of their capital to son or daughter, whichever the other partner. That constitutes a gift. Now there'll be no capital gains tax on it because it'll more than likely qualify for holdover relief. But it is a gift of business capital, of a business asset within a partnership. That doesn't matter. It's a gift which would be a gift for inheritance tax purposes, and you have to survive it 7 years for it to fall out your estate.
We're talking about splitting the ownership of a farm between married couples. Is it better for them to own it sort of the whole jointly, or split it so they own half each, but they own a defined part?
I think probably you're better at answering this. It goes back to the tenant in common. I think if you own defined bits of it each, it gives you more flexibility than if you own a bit of it all. But that would be my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's best to have a clear definition, because as we said, I think it's going to be the case that HMRC is going to be looking very closely at everything going forward. So I think as much evidence that there's a clear separation is going to be better.
Just very quickly on the partnership, can you split the partnership so that there are maybe 4 partners and they are, let's say, 25% each, but have a different relationship in terms of the share of the profit?
The general message is that providing you've got it in an express partnership agreement and everyone is on board, you can work your partnership in whatever way that you might want to. Obviously that will be subject to different considerations from a tax perspective. From my fellow speakers, I don't know whether you want to go into that a little bit.
And then could you change the split later on?
Yeah, I agree with what's just been said. Yes. What you've got, everyone, if you have a partnership agreement, you can do what you like. You still have to consider tax and you still have to consider the numbers. But if you haven't a partnership agreement, you're sharing it equally by the 1890 Act, that wonderful bit of modern legislation. But if you have a partnership agreement, you can document how you want to split the profits. This year, you can change it next year if you want. You can also document it and say, right, the profits we make from farming, we split like 25, whatever it might be. The profits on a capital sale of land or anything else belong to other partners. So you have real flex, but it has to be in a partnership agreement. If you start altering the capital profits that you receive on sale of assets, you're back into the realms of a gift. Yeah, and then there's those things to consider. But, you know, my colleagues here are absolutely right. Partnership agreements, we would argue every business should have always had one. By God, we're going to need them now.
Can I just ask, inheritance tax, if it's paid, does it have to be paid, or can it be paid over a 10-year period, interest free?
Yeah, you're right. The proposal is that it can be paid over 10 years in 10 equal instalments, and it's interest free as long as you pay it on time. Yeah.
Is that only for the farming business? So, or is that for anything?
No, it's just, you're right, it's just on the agricultural bit of it. If you're paying inheritance tax on, you know, your share portfolio, whatever it might be, it just has to get paid before the estate is distributed.
Free consultation, it's worth it. Is the house, because it's part of the business, can you get it at a much lower market rate because it's not open to the market? What are the tricks of getting the value of these things that we have sort of to the minimum?
Where's your MD and the valuers at? Farmhouses have always been a pet hate of HMRC, let's be honest, and there is already case law that says your farmhouse has to be of a character appropriate to the farm. So the classic example of that is if you've got a mansion with 10 sheep running around the extensive parkland, it's probably not going to get agricultural property relief, and probably still, well, definitely won't. So it has to be character. And the other thing, to make sure, it's all about, I think, the value is the value, but make sure the farmers living in the farmhouse, and you don't really want elderly grandparents living in the farmhouse if the next generation or the next generation are really running the farm, because that will negate it from being. The farmhouse has to have the active farmer in, and by active they don't mean being a partner on the paperwork, they mean who's running it. And these things are all going to come more critical because of the tax changes. But yeah, I'll not comment on values of things. It's not my field at all.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much for those answers there. I can see someone moving at the door, so I think that means tea's about ready. So it just falls to me just to wrap up tonight. First and foremost, thank you all for coming. I hope you've all been able to take something away from this. No doubt lots to think about. Thank you to our speakers. As I say, some points there for us all to think about. I think from my point of view, the take-homes really are now is not the time for knee-jerk reactions. It's the time for making informed, considered decisions. There are positive steps that we can take and need to take along the way. But I think if you take anything away from tonight, please just take away that you're not alone in all of this. And that might mean engaging with some of the people stood on the stage tonight through the FFRF scheme. It might also mean engaging with Sally, who we've got at the back of the room, and some of our fantastic farming charities. It's a particularly difficult time. And if you're struggling, or you think that a neighbour, a friend, a family member is struggling, please reach out to these organisations because they do really good work. For other people, it might be as simple as going down to the pub and chewing the fat with some friends. But as I say, please just remember that you're not alone in all this. And, we are here to help. And with that, we'll go and have some tea. Thank you very much.